This week, I'm sharing how I tried using Benjamin Moore Advanced Paint for painting furniture. It's an alkyd paint that doesn't require a top coat like a bunch of furniture paint does, so I've been really curious to use it. I'll share my thoughts about it, how I used it, and how it all turned out in the end. So let's dive in. This is what we started with. I found these matching nightstands at our local thrift store for $35 each. They were in really good shape other than some scratches on the tops. But man, raise your hand if you think that the original hardware on this piece has got to go. Actually, I think just changing out the hardware on these nightstands would make a huge difference. But I'm a painter, so you know I had to get some paint on these too. So first things first, I've removed the old hardware. And then I filled in the old holes on the bottom drawers so I could put new hardware on. And then I cleaned the nightstands with crud cutter to remove any dirt, grease, or grime that was on the surface. I thought I would be proactive and sand the tops down just a little bit to remove the scratches in the top. So I sanded it down with 100 grit sandpaper to start with. And then I sanded it down with 150 grit sandpaper. And then after that, I sanded it all down with 220 grit sandpaper. Then I filled the scratches that were there with some regular old wood filler. After the fillers were dry, I sanded down the drawers smooth and sanded the tops down smooth too. And then I cleaned off all of the dust. Then I moved them into my spray area to spray them with some clear shellac. I used the clear shellac mostly to help the paint stick to the surface without scuff sanding everything down first. If you've seen any of my other videos except for the ones recently, you've probably seen me talk all about scuff sanding and priming before painting. But now I'm on a mission to really test out this clear shellac to see if all the paints that I use will stick really well with only this clear shellac to make it stick. Spoiler alert, I think it worked. I love how easy it is to spray on and how I don't have to sand even after I spray it on, unlike some other spray primers that are gritty when you spray them. Plus, this clear shellac helps to prevent bleed-through issues, so it's my go-to for almost everything. So I sprayed both nightstands with 2 coats of clear shellac, letting it dry for an hour between each coat. Then it was time to paint. I chose a satin sheen of the Benjamin Moore color named Essex Green. I poured the paint into my paint sprayer. And then I added about 20% water and mixed the paint and water together really well. Before I sprayed it onto the furniture though, I tested out the spray on some cardboard so I could make sure that I had the settings and thickness of the paint right. And then I sprayed it on, all over the nightstands. Okay, while I'm spraying, let's talk a little bit about this paint. So this paint is a waterborne alkyd paint. So you clean it up with water, you can add water to it, but once it's cured, it's like an oil-based paint. And because of that, I've heard it's super durable. I love that it doesn't require a top coat. Actually, you shouldn't top coat this paint. And from what I've heard, you can brush, roll, or spray it on and get great results. But one big downside is that the can says that it has to dry for 16 hours between coats. When I sprayed it, it did leave a slight orange peel texture behind, but I had heard from other painters that that was kind of normal, so I really wasn't too worried. And for all of you that hate when I leave the drawers in when I painted the drawers while they were on the floor this time. Here's what the paint looked like after it had some time to dry. You can see that some of the orange peel stayed, but most of it leveled out. After about 17 hours, I checked on the nightstands, and I saw a big boo-boo. The tops of the nightstands had a lot of swirl marks on them, which is really weird because I normally don't get swirl marks with the sander, so I need to look into that a little bit more. But the sheen also looked splotchy from the areas that I had sanded down more, and I was a little bit worried about that going into this. So I went back to the drawing board and I sanded the tops completely down to bare wood. While I sanded them down, I had plenty of time to think about what I wanted to do now. I could either paint them again or I could leave them wood. I'm curious though, what would you do at this point though? I decided to go with it and just whitewash the tops. So first I applied a coat of poly and I let it dry. And then I brushed on 2 coats of this lime wash glaze from Paint Couture Paint. And quickly wiped it back off. After a few minutes, I wiped that dirty rag back over it to wipe a little bit of the glaze back onto it. Check out the after on the right side and the before on the left side here. A couple of hours later, after the whitewash was dry, I applied a couple more coats of water-based poly, letting each coat dry for a couple of hours after each coat, and sanding with a fine pad before the last coat. I also took a minute to lightly sand the green paint to make sure that it was smooth before I painted another coat. And before I painted again, I taped off the tops so I wouldn't get any paint on them. Then I sprayed a second coat of paint. The next day, I removed the plastic and started trying to figure out what hardware to use. I found these drawer pulls in my stash of old hardware, and I thought that they might go well with the nightstands. So I cleaned them up, and then I decided to paint them. I'll share a quick video on how I've been painting my hardware soon. Before I share what these nightstands look like now, please take a second to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really helps get my videos out to more people, so thank you so much. Here's what they looked like before. And here's what they look like now. Alright, now for my final thoughts on Benjamin Moore Advanced Paint. I love that you don't have to top coat it, but overall with dry times, it took longer than I'm used to with other paints. I've heard that these dark colors of alkyd paint take a really long time to cure, and it is so true. I've had these nightstands painted for a couple of weeks now, and I had to be so careful when putting the hardware back on. Just using the tape measure left marks in the paint. With other furniture paints and water-based poly, I don't have issues with light use even after a day or two. The clear shellac primer seems to have worked pretty well. I tested an area on the inside of the legs without any shellac, and the paint scratched off so easily there. So I think that after the paint cures all the way, it won't easily scratch off where the shellac was applied first. And that's it. I'll see you in the next video.